Anyway, you were talking about riding gypsy with Joe Charles?
Yeah. Well, I had, on Daddy's side of the family, I had all of these boy cousins that were close to my age. I had Perry, Uncle Lloyd's son, who was a grade behind me, but he and I were approximately the same age. Then there was Pat and Max Crabb, and Max was older than I was, but he was a grade behind me. I skipped a grade. And then there was Pat, who was approximately 2 years older than I was, and Lacey McLary, who was about 2 or 3 years older than I was. And so there were no girl cousins to play with. And then there was Jerry Flo on mother's side, Aunt Frances's daughter, but she was about 2 years younger than I was, and she lived in Dallas, so I rarely saw her. So most of my life was spent playing with boys.
And so they were the people you saw most.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have friends on your street or near you?
Well, of course, at White Oak, you were stuck with, whoever you went to school with. Unfortunately, my best friend at White Oak School lived south of the highway, and we lived north of the highway. So it was over 2 miles from my house to her house. And she came from a big family.
And how old were you when you moved to Crush?
I was
In 5th grade?
eighth, the middle of the 8th grade. So I was like 12, 13.
Where did you play? In the house, the yard,
Well,
in the pasture, the street?
when we moved to Crush, I kept the lawn mowed. That was the first time we'd ever had electricity. So the radio was fascinating to me. Well, when we lived in town, we had electricity, but that's the first time we lived in the country that we had electricity. So the radio was fascinating. That was the first time we ever kept the lawn mowed, and it was my duty to keep the lawn mowed, and that was about, I guess, 1/4 acre. It was a lot of lawn.
Wow.
And Mother never did make me milk cows. Never did do any of that. But I had to help with the mills, help with the ironing, help with the washing, and do dishes. Can you turn it off a minute?
Sure. You're on.
Well, when we lived by the railroad and I was 3 to 4, 5 years old, we had this lovely pool that had a sand bottom. In fact, the church would do the baptizing in our pool.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my fondest memories is my dad, instead of heating water and taking a bath, after he got through milking on summer nights, he went down to the pool and went swimming. And one night, Joe Charles was spending the night with me, and we had cross ties down there. And Daddy set Joe Charles and I on a cross tie and would push us all the way across the pool with us straddling the cross tie.
So good exercise for him.
Mm-hmm.
And fun for you. So would you say Joe Charles was your best friend?
Oh, definitely.
And did you ever play at his house?
Oh, yes, and his mother bought him a doll so that when it rained, I could bring my doll and we could play dolls. Otherwise, we played cowboys and Indians, and one day we roped the dolls, put a rope round and round them to his chinaberry tree, and they were our hostages and we were Indians.
And so his mother was Lois Guy's sister.
Right.
And was their family much different than yours?
Oh, much. His father I didn't think had much of a sense of humor. Joe Charles had rather come to our house than have me at his house. However, they had a team of horses. His dad was a wonderful farmer, and they had a team of horses named Bud and Bill. And Uncle Tom called Joe Charles and I Bud and Bill.
And so this is going to start going through your school years.
Okay.
What was the name of your elementary school?
Well, I went to White Oak School.
Who was your first class teacher?
Mrs. Reba Brewer, and I went to a country school where they taught 7 grades in one room, and we had a wooden thing that hung up on the wall over the chalkboard that maps pull down, and I loved the history lessons and the geography lessons for the older kids. And my sister Martha had taught me to read before I went to school, and I was bored silly. The first book I finally got, I read it on the 1.5 mile walk on the way home and knew every word in it and thought it was the dumbest book I had ever seen. Anyway, they passed the Gilmer-Aiken bill that said you had to spend 2 years in the first grade, or else you had to skip a grade. They were going to make it 12 grades. The teacher came to visit with Mother, and Mother said, you can keep her back if you want to, but you have to keep her busy. And the teacher says, then she's going to skip a grade. So I went to school only 11 years.
Who did you sit next to in the school?
Well, Bobby McMahon was my best friend, and she sat behind me, and Joe Charles sat across the aisle from me, or a couple, I guess he may have been 2 grades ahead of me, and well, he sat the next row over.
Besides geography, what did you like most about the school day?
Well, we had recess, and we played Red Rover, and we played softball, and we had outdoor johns, and we had a cloakroom, and little girls wore dresses to school, and so it was so cold, I wore overalls over my dresses, would turn the skirt up, and would take off my overalls in the cloakroom before I went into the schoolroom.
How did you get to school?
Walked.
How long?
About 1.5 miles. And I went there until I started the 5th grade, so I only went 4 years there. And we put on a Christmas play and an end of school play every year, and they were held in the church. There was a Centerpoint Methodist Church that was across the highway from the school. And in one of the Christmas plays, I played an old lady, and Mother made me a black skirt and cut down an old satin blouse and pulled my hair back and put powder on it so that I had gray hair.
What did you like least about the school day?
I can't think of anything that I didn't like about school. And in the wintertime, our teacher said if we did our lessons really well, that the last 30 minutes she would read to us. And so she read the book Freckles Comes Home, and Girl of the Limberlost to us. And I was completely fascinated with those books. And she went to the public library every week, and she could check out 15 books, and she put them on every grade level, and you could only keep the book 1 night or 2 nights, and you had to bring it back and exchange it. But these were my first things with books, and I was just fascinated. And then when we moved into Sulphur Springs, it was the librarian that taught me elocution and tap dance, and so I checked out books all the time we lived there. And then in high school we had a library, and I checked out books from it. And when I moved to Dallas, I discovered the public library, and when I worked downtown, I checked out books from it. And do you remember me taking y'all to the Oak Cliff Library?
Every Saturday. We haven't started Nick on that yet, but soon. So in school, who looked after you day to day? Like before and after school, it was your mom, right?
Right.
Did anybody pick you up or take you home from school?
Nope. Walked every day.
And did your mother make supper every night?
Definitely. And for one of my birthdays, it rained, and she got this man who had the mark of the drunkard to bring her in a wagon up to the school ground, and she had asked my teacher for permission to have a birthday party for me. And in those days there was no such thing as plastic. The only thing you had that was fairly waterproof was wax paper, and she had packed fudge and whatnot in post-toasty boxes, and brought candy and cake and whatnot for all the kids. Of course, they didn't bring gifts to me or anything. We just had a little party. And she always made me a birthday cake. And one year for my birthday, she made me a pair of navy blue overalls with red and yellow seam tape over the pockets. And I got a color book and a box of watercolors. For Christmas, we always had a cedar tree. Daddy always acted as though he didn't like Christmas, but when it came the week before Christmas and we would talk about going to get the Christmas tree, he had always had a cedar tree on the place spotted. He knew exactly where it was, and so we went, and we had a sled that he had built and with a rope pull on it, and they would put it was a small one, and they'd put the Christmas tree on it and bring it back to the house. And we had a red berry tree that grew out behind the barn, and I would go cut red berries. And my brother always collected mistletoe, and we always had mistletoe put up. And of course, Mother saved the Christmas decorations and ironed wrapping paper and saved all of the ribbons, and you used them all the next year. We even had, the icicles were made out of tin foil, and you even saved those, and you straightened them out every year and put them on the Christmas tree.
What kind of food did you eat for supper?
Well, we killed hogs the first freeze, which was usually around Thanksgiving. We killed hogs, and we would have fresh sausage, and Mother usually smoked bacon, and she sugar cured hams, and so we had that. And occasionally, when I got older, Daddy would kill a calf, and we would have fresh beef, and then Mother had she would can the rest of the beef and in fruit jars and cook it in the pressure cooker. And we bought 100 to 200 chickens every spring, and we had fried chicken all summer. Every Sunday you had fried chicken. And of course we always grew a garden, and we had peas or beans almost every meal.
What about bread?
Mother made hot rolls. However, some mothers in the community made loaves of bread and sliced it, and their kids brought homemade bread. But Mother she thought that this was might make us stand out, especially the older kids at school, and so they bought enough bread on Saturdays to last during the week for sandwiches.
As a child, were you well behaved or mischievous?
Well, it depended on who you asked.
Well, what was the naughtiest thing you did?
The breaking of the lamp, and I believe Uncle Ted's came out and he went bird hunting, and I killed some chickens because I wanted to have some birds too.
How old were you?
Oh, 4.
Were you punished?
I'm sure I was. And one of my earliest memories is Mother and Daddy had a dance one time, and Daddy held, I guess it was the first time I ever saw my mother and Daddy dance together, and we had a wind-up Victrola, and Daddy would hold me and dance with my mother.
Ah.
And my mother had, in that same period, got sick with erysipelas, and they thought she was going to die.
Erysipelas, what's that?
It's a thing your nose turns black, but it's some sort of infection, and sometimes you live, sometimes you don't.
Oh my God.
And of course, this was the day before penicillin or sulfa drug or anything like that. And she had milk leg after Martha was born, so that left, and she had varicose veins, but that left her veins even weaker, so she always had a sore on the inside of one of her ankles, and she had to wear rubber stockings.
Hmm.
And she treated it with medicated powder and zinc oxide ointment.
Mm.
It formed an ulcer. So she always limped, even from the time I was a small child.
Hmm. Wonder, moving on to happier times, besides the birthday party that you mentioned, what were your birthdays like in general? Did you have parties?
Never had a birthday party. It was always just a family thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I always had a cake.
And what was your best ever present?
My best. When we were living in town, I got a birthstone ring, an amethyst in a little gold ring, and when our house was broken into, the amethyst had broken and fallen out, but somebody stole the little gold ring that it was in.
This house or?
Mhm.
Oh. What was the name of your junior high and high school?
Well, I went to Sulphur Springs Junior High, and it was behind the high school at that particular time on Conley Street in Sulphur Springs. And it once caught on fire. We heard all of this crackling up in the ceiling, and we ended up having to get out, and then it had to be rewired.
Mm.
My favorite teacher was Mrs. Lehman Teets, and she taught me 8th grade English and American history. She was fantastic, had the best nose. So she would say, "Someone in here is chewing gum." And one girl says, "I've got dentine," and she says, "No, that isn't it." And Ruthie Dean Davis says, "I've got some tea-berry in my purse," and she says, "That's it." She could tell what kind of chewing gum it was just from the smell.
Hmm.
But she was my absolutely favorite teacher of all time.
Who were your close friends in high school, and are you still friendly with them now?
Haven't seen most of them. Marianne Hardy, I see them at class reunions, and Geraldine Hamilton, and Carmen Cummings. Carmen died last year,
Oh.
and she never did marry.
Which teachers do you particularly remember, and why?
There was Marie Wilson, who taught me plane geometry, that was always saying, "See thar?" Then there was Wayne Melton, who gave me a second-year algebra test, and he gave 5 fractions to reduce, as he said, so everybody could make at least 5, and I missed 2 of those. And when we came in, I believe this was the midterm test, and he says, Well, McLary made the highest grade, but I ought to fail her. She reduced two of the fractions wrong. And he says, McLary, what are you thinking about? He says, your cousin Weldon was the best in math I've ever known. And I said, Mr. Melton, do you know my Aunt Flo? And he said, yes. And I said, well, she can add 4 and 4 and get 9.
Do you have fond memories of your school days?
Pretty muchly.
When you were a teenager, were your parents strict or lenient?
Well, I didn't have many chances to date. As I said, my father told me I could never date anybody named Sewell, that he wasn't going to make many rules, but I couldn't date anybody named Sewell.
Were you expected to help around the house?
Oh, yes. Dishes, mowing lawn, ironing.
Did you have a curfew?
As I say, I didn't date.
Who was your first love, and how old were you?
Well, my first boyfriend was James Fortenberry, and I was in the 5th grade.
And when was your first kiss?
I think it was in the 5th grade.
James Fortenberry?
No, I think it was Junior Burns.
Oh. Where was it?
On
the mouth?
At a party at Don Skinner's house.
Oh.
On College Street in Sulphur Springs.
So you didn't have a steady boyfriend as
No.
a teenager? Did you go to your prom?
Yes, but I didn't have a date. But I sat at the head table and I had to make some sort of speech. Oh, I had introduced the faculty, and I wore a dress that Mother had made, formal that Mother had made for Martha when she graduated from high school, and it was rust-colored over gold taffeta. It was beautiful. The only problem was Ray Horner, who was a nerd, was sitting beside me, and he had his chair on my dress, and when I stood up to introduce the faculty, I could only get about this high. And so I said, Ray, you're on my dress, but I had the microphone in my hand, and it went out all over the banquet, and everybody cracked up.
What was fashionable when you were in school?
Well, bobby socks and saddle shoes and penny loafers. I had saddle shoes. And we went through the poodle skirts and the big petticoats. I didn't have any really big petticoats, but your Aunt BJ did. And, but of course we didn't have that much money, so.
So you didn't follow the latest trends?
No.
Did your parents have an opinion on what you wore or how you looked? Like, could you wear makeup?
Well, I wore lipstick, and that was about it. We really couldn't afford makeup, and I didn't know how to put it on. But however, when I went to any sort of function at school, I spent the night with Aunt Flo, who made up my face. Okay.
How many children do you have? What are their names? And when and where were they born? I'll help you with that one.
Well, then I have 4. And Stephanie was born in Sulphur Springs on February the 24th.
December 24th.
I mean, December the 24th, 1954. And they put me in labor. And as I say, the Sulphur Springs hospital was small. And your dad came to see me at about midnight and brought his dad with him. And I was nursing Stephanie, and your dad, since it was Christmas Eve and I had missed Mother's dinner, he brought me a piece of date loaf. So I was eating date loaf at midnight and nursing Stephanie. She was born about, I guess about 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve. And then
Teresa Gale.
They put me, Teresa Gale was born October the 12th, St. Teresa's Day. in 1959, and Dr. Brown was going on a deer hunting trip, so he put me in labor 2 weeks early, and she was the only one that really had any hair. And the first time I saw her, she had this little dark curl up on top of her head, and she weighed 6 pounds and 6 ounces. Stephanie weighed 7'1". 7'1". And then you were born November 24th, 1961, and you weighed 7'2", and you were born on the Friday after Thanksgiving.
At 4:20 in the afternoon.
Right, and your dad forgot where he was going when he was taking me to the hospital that morning, and I said, "Where are you going?" "Well, I guess I'm going to work." And I said, "Well, drop me off at the hospital first." And Dr. Brown was late. I was awake when you were born because Dr. Brown was late getting to because there had been a car wreck and he had been stuck in the emergency room all afternoon. And then Scott was born breech on March the 9th, 1963. But you and Terry and Scott were all born at Methodist Hospital here in Oak Cliff.
And did it take long to decide on our names?
Well, we made an agreement. Your dad could pick out the girls' names. I could pick out the boys. I had picked out James Michael, and turned out BJ had used Michael before we got, so I changed it to James Scott. But he was going to be Leslie Dawn.
Ah. When were you proudest of your children? Or what are your happiest memories of their childhood?
Of the childhood, let's see. I really have to think about this. I think I've always been proud of you. Of course, Scott drove me bananas when he was a teenager, but Stephanie always made really good grades. But she had this problem with Emily Clore. She let children that were younger than she was run right over her. Terry was Miss Daredevil. Just everything. She was very physically active and could do anything. In fact, before she learned to walk, she was climbing up on the back of the couch and jumping off on the cushions. Just drove me bananas. And then you, of course, were so hard. You had such muscles, and you weighed a ton. I mean, you were almost impossible to pick up. But the first time